Thank you. The machinery of American government looks as if it'll be coming out of suspended animation tomorrow. The confrontation between Republican legislators and President Obama was seemingly resolved 2 hours ago. The formal vote will happen later tonight. But it is only yet another stay of execution, saving the world from another financial crisis. For a country that is so often considered a model democracy, it's an extraordinary situation. Alan Little is in Washington.
I rise today in opposition to Obamacare.
We shouldn't inflict pain on the American people to try to see if one side gets a little extra leverage.
Washington is more split than ever before. This country is more divided than ever before.
On Capitol Hill, they've been arguing about the deck chairs while the ship's been sinking. How has it come to this, that the world's great pioneer democracy should so risk economic calamity?
In a sense, Americans have been having this argument for more than 200 years. How big, how powerful should the federal government be? The American Republic was born in a citizens' revolt against an overweening monarchical power. That's still very much at the heart of the American identity. The idea that as an American, you should be an independent citizen, self-reliant, not dependent on any government.
For many conservatives, the growth of federal power under President Obama is a blow against the character of America itself.
Alan Little from BBC.
Yeah.
Can we have a quick word?
Sure.
They've risked economic disaster to refight a battle on healthcare that they lost 3 years ago.
You are going to harm the country immeasurably, and not only the country, the rest of the global
Nothing
economy.
could be more harmful to the economy and the American people than Obamacare. Putting under government control 1/6 of the economy. And I realize in Great Britain that's something that perhaps you embrace. But we've actually looked at your system and we see a lot of problems and a lot of flaws that we don't want to replicate in this country.
So this is a law that's already passed, it already has democratic legitimacy, both houses, and the president signed it off. You're prepared to tip this economy into what many people say will be calamity,
well, you know what?
To fight that battle that you've already lost.
We had, prohibition was not only a law but a constitutional amendment. We repealed that. The 55-hour speed limit was a law. We repealed that. We repeal bad laws all the time around here. Again, in England, I don't know if that's the case.
This is an old divide in America. There are echoes here today of the 1930s, when President Franklin Roosevelt enacted America's first Social Security legislation.
It was almost word for word the challenges that were being made to the Affordable Care Act. You know, the federal government taking a larger role in our health care and our pension system, the federal government, prying into people's lives and orchestrating people's lives, almost word for word, the same arguments.
18 years ago.
That's right, but you know what? Social Security, not only was it passed, signed into law, but once it happens, the American people accept that. They embrace these programs. And I think that's part of the fear that's going on among Republicans, is the fact that they never supported those programs when they were first introduced years ago. And they know that once people get used to having universal access to affordable health care, they're not going to want to give it up.
Which is, of course, precisely what small government conservatives fear, that once the power and scope of federal government has expanded, there's never any going back.
You can argue that the election of President Obama in 2008 was one of those rare moments when America tips from one era into another. For 40 years before that, ever since the election of Richard Nixon in 1968, conservative America had an almost unbroken hold on the White House. In all that time, only 2 Democrats made it to the presidency. And both of them, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, were Southern white men who came to Washington with the mud of the conservative rural South on their boots. Many conservatives came to believe that this was a semi-permanent state of affairs, that they'd managed to build such a lasting majority in the country that it made them, the Republicans, the natural party of government.
The Tea Party Republicans now look more like an angry counterculture, the natural party of protest. Liberals and conservatives have switched roles.
I think you are seeing a historic realignment. It's being driven largely by the increasing secularization of the United States, particularly among younger people, who are much less likely to be religiously affiliated or observant than older Americans. The United States is maybe 20 or 30 years behind Britain and Western Europe in the degree of secularization. And why is this significant? It means that a lot of these religious right culture war issues are simply losing their traction.
Even so, Americans remain skeptical about the state. At the Lincoln Memorial, we found one protester linking today's crisis explicitly to the core values of the American identity.
What is the answer to your own question? What does it mean to you to be an American?
It means that you can be a sovereign citizen. It means that you can be a free man. And whatever you want to make for yourself, decision-wise, you can do that.
And do you think that's under threat?
I think that it's directly under threat right now.
Two Americas there are that fight for ascendancy in the nation that first securely entrenched government of the people, by the people, for the people. Seldom, though, does that fight bring the people as close to calamity as it did tonight.
Well, we're joined now from New York by the historian Simon Sharma with his view on the latest from that great country. It's an extraordinary spectacle watching from some distance away. What lesson do you think we should draw, Simon?
Well, I don't think it's, believe it or not, I don't think it's a failure of democratic institutions, much less the Constitution, Jeremy. I think what we're witnessing is a profound personality, identity crisis among inside the Republican Party, actually inside Republican conservatism, because it was not the case that even, during the period of extreme alienation from the administration of Jimmy Carter, or even from Bill Clinton, while government was shut down, that essentially there was so much throwing toys out of the pram in order to actually use the fundamental credit and good faith of the United States and its debt to get your way in order to reverse legislation which has already been enacted. There was a moment in Alan Little's excellent piece where a congressman was saying, well, we've repealed lots of good laws, and that is the heart of the issue. It is right now impossible to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, the Obamacare Act, because any repeal law has to be passed as a discrete, standalone piece of legislation. The president would veto it, and in order to override the veto, this is crucial, you need a 2/3 majority of both houses of Congress. So what do you do when you know you can't repeal it? You either turn it into a kind of semi-comic piece of theatrical grandstanding, like Senator Ted Cruz filibustering the other night, or you just really go on screaming and having a tantrum and throwing the toys out of the pram and threatening to bring about not just an American, but a global fiscal calamity because you're not getting your way. It's a kind of infantilization of politics on the Republican right.
But when you have a constitution which allows the entire world's financial system to be brought almost to the brink of crisis, doesn't it indicate there's something, really outmoded, something that needs changing, something that's broken about the Constitution?
Well, I'm open to hearing suggestions from you, Jeremy.
Well, it is very old now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's quite true. And again, the Alan Little piece was just absolutely spot on in that the argument between Jefferson and John Adams was exactly over the extent to which any sort of federal government authority was going to be legitimate. But this is crucial. Once a sort of democratic Republican, as he was called, like Jefferson, came into office, he understood that American government was not an oxymoron, that actually the process of governance was extremely important. And, quite often, actually, Jefferson was a good case in point. He grasped the reins of government with an appetite which sometimes dismayed his more individually minded supporters. Look, what's happening inside the Republican Party is a profound split in two ways. One is between seeing republicanism as a kind of evangelical church. It was no accident, as I think you'd say, that the Republican caucus prefaced their deliberations in that nadir of idiocy yesterday when John Boehner failed to get the House to come up with their own plan to negotiate with the White House. They prefaced it by a rousing chorus of amazing grace. Now, you can either assume that politics is an act of kind of spiritual rebirth, or you can, you know, generations of conservative lawmakers have accepted, and this is still the case with someone like Mitch McConnell in the Senate, without whom the deal to get us back from the brink couldn't happen. You assume that whatever your conservatism, you do it through the machinery of politics, through a sense of basic diplomacy, which is not prepared to sort of push the United States right and the rest of the world's economy to the brink of ruin. The difficulty is right now, we're in a kind of isolationist moment in America. The tendency to really want to tell the rest of the world to go away is ominously fierce. And the more bewildering, the more distressed, the more alienated, the more upset Americans are by the long-term consequences of what's been happening to the economy since 2008, the deafer, at the extreme right, the deafer, the angrier, the more obtuse, the more I'm mad as hell sounds like the mantra of the estranged. And that's a kind of real threat to the system because of the way primary challenges work to produce Republican congressmen, all congressmen.
Simon Sharma, thanks very much indeed. I wish you'd speak your mind more.
Yeah, I know, it's sad, isn't it? But that's because I'm heavily sedated right now.
Simon, thanks a lot. Bye.